Welcome back to the Traders Show. And in today's episode, we've created something new, what we call Visionaries Unplugged, where we talk about different stories by a couple of people who have inspired us coming up, the books we've read, and basically the iconic people we look up to, Ken and I, and people who've laid the vision that really inspired us to do what we do. And one of the most important people I want to talk about today, because his book was one of the first books I actually read when I was young, back then, almost 10 years ago, while I was still in high school, is the story of Steve Jobs, the dropout who dropped in and built the future. Steve Jobs remains to be one of my favorite icons in the world, dead or alive. Okay. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2011. So I'm a deep fan of Steve Jobs because what he believed and what he lived for is what I look up to. How he's able to run his company, how he got kicked out of his company, how he came back in and took it from having negative losses of $1 billion to making it currently the most valued company in the world with over $3 trillion in a market capitalization. So why not? Why not study Steve Jobs and see what he did? And for many of you, you'll learn a lot from it. So welcome to the Visionaries Unplugged, the show where we take iconic stories and turn them into fuel for your grind. If you're a trader, a founder, an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, a businessman, or just someone chasing your next big move, you're in the right place. In today's episode, I'll talk about Steve Jobs, the man who dropped out, dropped in, and ended up redefining the way we live, create, and connect. Based on the killer biography by Walter Isaacson, a book I recommend to all of you. Read this book. It's interesting, it's intriguing, it has a lot of fun. You'll go through the ups and downs of Steve Jobs, his family, the people around him, how he got fired, how he came back, how he started new companies, how he acquired Pixar. Some of you may not know, but the animation company called Pixar, and next Apple, and how he was able to redefine Hollywood and the tech industry. He's the genius, the madness, and the lessons. So I'll give you a bit story about Steve Jobs, and then we'll get back into the nitty-gritty of what he actually did and how he did it and how it inspired me. Steve Jobs was adopted. A neighbor once told Steve, "So, your real parents didn't want you." He ran home crying, but his adoptive parents looked him dead in the eye and said, "We specifically picked you." That line alone lit a fire. He always carried this paradox, abandoned but yet special. That edge became his engine. He was smart, rebellious, curious. And then one day in high school, he met a guy who could build anything with a circuit. Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak was the brains. Steve Jobs was the vision. Together, they hacked phones using blue boxes and made free long-distance calls. Was this illegal? Yes. But it showed one thing. They could build and they could sell. Steve Jobs dropped out of Reed College, but he stuck around auditing calligraphy classes. Weird move? Maybe. But that class, it inspired the fonts on the original Mac. Every pixel in that machine had soul because of it. If you read the book by Walter Isaacson, it goes deep to explain how he went for those calligraphy classes. First started like, what is the aim for this? How will it help me? That time he had no idea whether he's going to start Apple, whether he's going to build a company. But deep down, following your gut, following your feeling, he knew this will inspire later on to become something bigger than himself. Then later on, he goes to India, barefoot, hungry, and broke, searching for enlightenment. And there's a common theme about going to India and coming back a changed person. If you read the book Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, he also had a trip where he went to India for some time, and it really changed the way he thinks and who he is as a person. Sort of what they call that enlightenment. He later comes back to California, with a shaved head, because if you know Steve Jobs, long time, he used to put long hair. He was smelling like fruit, and he got a job at Atari. His hygiene was so bad, they made him work the night shift. During this time, if you read the book, you get to see that Steve Jobs used to like walking barefoot, never used to shower that much. He also never used to shower because he believed eating healthy and eating carrots and fruits will naturally just clean your body and you'll be a clean person. Okay? So that's why they sort of put him in the night shift. But here's the twist. He's not there to coast. He's there to learn, to sell, and to lead. One day, while they're just doing their errands and all this, Wozniak comes up and tells Steve Jobs that he built the first Apple just for fun. Jobs says, "We are selling this," after he gets to see the Apple. Wozniak sort of hesitates, but Jobs pushes. That push becomes the first Apple sale. That's where they began, selling their first 50 computers. Built in a garage, delivered in boxes, and sold before they even had parts. Here's where Jobs becomes the Jobs we know. He had something people around him called reality distortion field. And this distortion field is sort of what I personally believe the current richest person in the world, Elon Musk, also sort of suffers from. We can call it sort of like a good curse. He would say something insane and people will believe it. Then he'd push them so hard that they actually did it. One employee said he could convince you to walk through a wall and you'd do it. But it had a dark side as well. Okay? Jobs could be at times very, very cruel, cold. He even denied his own daughter Lisa for years, even though he named a computer after her. And this reality distortion field, we could see it coming on and off many times. He could burst into that reality distortion. If you could tell him something is not possible and cannot be done, he will easily fire you on the spot. The Steves in Isaacson's book is both the hero and anti-hero, what in the film industry we call the protagonist and the antagonist. He was brilliant, no doubt, but at times he was very much deeply flawed. Just to cut that story, there's a very wonderful and interesting animation I just watched recently. It's on Netflix. You can go check it out. It's called Pantheon. Okay? Pantheon. Pantheon. Go check it out. It's very interesting, and they portray Steve Jobs in a way in that series and how sort of he thinks and sort of how he was. Sort of, okay, not exactly. It's not a story behind Steve Jobs, because there's a movie for Steve, and if you go search Steve Jobs, you can find his movies. There's two of them. One acted by Michael Fassbender, a very good actor, one of my favorites, and the other one the other one was Ashton Kutcher. It's good I remember this stuff. Ashton Kutcher. So go check them both, but they were very, very interesting. But also watch Pantheon. It's something else, something different, but also portrays Steve Jobs in a way. So go check it out and see how he was brilliant, but sometimes deeply flawed. Back to the story. Fast forward, Apple's booming. The Macintosh is born. Jobs gives one of the greatest product launch speeches ever. 1984 won't be like 1984. So imagine being told that in 2025. The 2025 you know won't be like the 2025 you think. It's going to be much bigger, much greater, much better. And then, out of the blues, betrayal. Steve Jobs gets kicked out of his own company. It's brutal. And the reason why they sort of did this is because they thought Steve Jobs, the company Apple, was becoming huge, it was becoming big. They believed Steve Jobs was naive, young, inexperienced, and sort of like the curse of the youth. He cannot run a big company. We need to bring experienced professional people. A big mistake that will haunt them later on, but during this time, instead of disappearing, Steve Jobs launches Next and buys small animation studio that I mentioned earlier called Pixar. At first, Both companies really struggle. And then Pixar releases Toy Story, and everything changes. Most of you are big fans of Toy Story, and right now I believe we've had animation of Toy Stories, multiple of them. Movie-wise, we have Toy Story. I believe now we have Toy Story 5. Okay, but it all started with Steve Jobs. If you read the book, you'll see how he went to the nitty-gritty, focusing with the animators back then, the big animators. I don't remember their actual names, but he was dealing with them, telling them, this is what we need to do. Change this. I don't like this, and all that. Okay, so Pixar releases Toy Story and everything changes. Then, in one of the most epic comeback stories ever, after years of struggle, years of hardship, Apple this time was struggling. Apple comes back and buys Next, and Jobs returns home. After a long struggle, many years of building Next, building Pixar, Apple going up, soaring to highs, and then suffering a big downturn. They had a very huge fall. Okay, it's like what they say, the African proverb, it takes many years to build a tree, but just a single cut and the whole tree comes trembling down. But Jobs returns home. He returns back to Apple. He's leaner, he's tougher, he's more experienced, and above all, he's more dangerous and hungry. And then the heat started coming. Just after he came back, he started working on a couple of stuff. And first of all, it's important to say he sacked every person who was there in the boardroom that sacked him when they were firing him out of Apple. He changed the whole executive board and brought in a new executive board. Like he said, he was much tougher at this time. He did not want no jokes. He doesn't care if you're the people who invested, the people like Mark Makula, one of the early investors in Apple. He said, all of you are out of the board. If you want me back here, we're going to run things my way. So he starts removing the hits. He launches the iMac, the iPod, the iTunes, the iPhone, and the iPad. A product blitz that literally reshaped our world as we know it. Jobs always said, I want to put a dent in the universe, and that for sure he did. And he did. Not just through tech, but through the marriage of art and science. He cared about design, experience, and emotion. One story, he rejected a batch of circuit boards because of the parts on the inside weren't pretty enough. And imagine, this is the inside, not the outside. They were inside, but they didn't look pretty enough. His engineer said, nobody will ever see it, Jobs. And Jobs replied, I will. And everything mattered to Jobs. Another time he said, design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. He wasn't building gadgets. He was building experiences. And if you're a business person, this is important for you to take into consideration. When you're building something, when you're working on something that is dear to you, that is going to reshape the world, you never know it's going to reshape the world, but you have to build it brick by brick. Take the time to go through the nitty-gritty. This is what makes the great great. There's a book by Jim Collins, and I'll do a review on it later on, called Good to Great. Okay? He emphasizes in that book that good is the enemy of great. Most people settle for good. If it's good enough, that's fine. But good enough does not change the world. A wonderful quote that I live by, and it says, the reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. That was a popular quote that was attributed to George Bernard Shaw. And I'll repeat it again just one more time, clearly and straight. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world, but the unreasonable one persists in trying to adapt the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man. Steve Jobs was the unreasonable man, and the world adapted itself to him. There are some quotes that stood out in the book that I'd like to share as well as I come to an end. Steve Jobs said, your time is limited, So don't waste it living someone else's life. That one will always resonate with me. Your time is limited. And Steve Jobs knew this, and he died at a very young age. I believe he was around 55, because he got sick, he had cancer, and he believed he could eat fruits and make himself better, like it wouldn't really affect him. But later on, that was a very dangerous mistake he did. If he just sought treatment, he would have been alive today. Maybe even the richest person in the world. But I guess we'll never know. But remember this, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Another quote he said, innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. And the last one, and I always live by this quote, and also on my Instagram page, Caleb Sami Trades, I have it on my bio. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Always be eager to learn, be eager to innovate, be eager to find out what's next. Okay? That is life's purpose. You want to always improve yourself. Okay? So if you can, write those down and live by them. Learn through them. So what's the takeaway from this story? If you're a trader, a founder, dreamer, businessman, anyone, remember this. The world doesn't move for people who play it safe. It moves for the ones who are bold enough to challenge it. I'll repeat that and remember it. The world doesn't move for people who play it safe. It moves for the ones bold enough to challenge it. Steve Jobs showed us that vision beats logic. Obsession can build empires, and sometimes the dropout becomes the professor. Wow. The dropout becomes the professor. So that's a wrap for today's episode on the Visionaries Unplugged. If you loved it, share it with one person chasing something big. Okay? And there's more to come. But until next time, stay bold, stay sharp, stay hungry, stay foolish. I'll see you on the other side.